Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about GHR absence management versus WFM absence management. We're going to cover some of the details of each of these systems and see which one might work best for your company. My name is Valerie Holschen, and I'm a Principal HCM Consultant here at RPI. And I've been working in the Infor space for about 20 plus years. And I'm happy to be joined today by Chris.
Hey everyone, I'm Christopher Scott, also a Principal Consultant at RPI, and I am in the workforce management practice. I've been working with the Infor WFM product for a little over 15 years now in total. So excited to be here today to talk about this great topic. So the first topic section we'll be talking about is how GHR and WFM handle absence accrual, policy or plan enrollments. So I'll start with you, Valerie, if you want to talk about GHR.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about how we would set up plans in GHR. They can be pretty flexible, as I'm sure they are in WFM as well. We can define specific employee groups around or custom groups around who we want to be in each of these plans. We can make them based off of an effective date. So if your rates change periodically, then they can be effective dated. We can also have employees enrolled automatically. So on a hire or a rehire, for instance, someone could be automatically enrolled into a plan based off of, again, the criteria. In the same token, when somebody falls out of a group and is no longer eligible for a plan, the system can also go ahead and stop the accruals and allotments for those employees as well. That piece is a little bit, I'm going to say, less automatic in the fact that we do have to run jobs, a specific job to be able to do that. But in general, we have the ability to, have those employee groups control who's actually in a plan. And then we can have employees enrolled, obviously, in multiple plans. So it just depends on how many accrual plans or absence plans your company would have. And then we can look at defining those individually and enrolling them proper employees into each of those.
So is that like a standard part of like the onboarding practice of onboarding an employee in GHR, or is that like a separate process that you do maybe bi-weekly?
So for a hire or a rehire, it's actually would be part of the standard process. So when we complete one of those hire actions or rehire actions, it automatically would trigger essentially a process behind the scenes that would go ahead and enroll those employees into those absence plans automatically. Again, if the plans are set up for automatic enrollment, you can also set up the plans that not set them up for automatic enrollment. And in that case, you would have to manually enroll them in the plans that you wanted them in. But yes, it's part of that hire and rehire process action.
Awesome. From a workforce management practice, if an organization chooses to do the accruals within WFM, in terms of enrolling them into what Infor WFM calls an accrual policy, so very similar to the accrual plans that you just talked about, but accrual policies are assigned as part of the employee import process. So that's bringing over the employee demographic information from GHR over to WFM. And typically nowadays that's done by BODs. We do a lot of mappings and cross references, but suffice it to say that the data within the employee profile drives what accrual policy or policies that an employee would belong to. And those policies are typically organized based on groups of employees, similar groups of employees. You might have nurses at a hospital that belong in one accrual policy, and then maybe administrative staff in another accrual policies. And those policies kind of have all of the accruals that are applicable to that employee, so vacation, sick, PTO, etc. Similar to GHR, they're also date effective, so you might have a 90-day waiting period for someone to become eligible for any accruals. That seems like it's very similar. If you decide to design it in a certain way, you could also have employees belong to more than one accrual policy, similar to those plans you talked about in GHR. So Seems like there's a lot of similarities in the enrollment. It's just our data comes to WFM through that employee import process in which we determine that eligibility. And then one point I mention here is that depending on the employee's employee status, whether they're active, maybe they're on a leave of absence, we can actually control the eligibility on a temporary level, so we can temporarily stop accruals based on an employee status. So seems like there's a lot of crossover and similarities with how you enroll employees in plans.
It does seem like there's a lot of similarities there. And as far as when people become ineligible for plans, is that just something that comes and is updated as those demographic files come in, or that demographic information comes into WFM?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you might have an employee that maybe becomes ineligible for benefits or ineligible for accruals, or maybe they're all on a more permanent leave of absence. So the accrual policies can be a date effective, but you can also enable or disable each one of the policies separately or all together. So yeah, that's a good question.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, moving on to basically the calculation and processing engine behind accruals. So I'll let you talk about GHR first, and then I'll jump into the WFM capabilities.
Sure. So in the GHR absence management, we are able to set up various cycles or timings, right? So if you pay your employees biweekly or weekly, monthly, semi-monthly, or if you have accruals or allotments that happen, let's say annually or quarterly, those all can be defined within the system itself. We also have the ability in the GHR absence to perform custom calculations. So if there is some factor of that employee's resource record that would contribute to how that employee would accrual would be calculated or allotment would be calculated, we can utilize that information as well. So for instance, if you had an allotment that was based off of an employee's FTE, we could incorporate that into the calculation. And we also can accrue hours at just a flat rate, let's say per your years of service or your longevity with the organization. We can also do it based off of, let's say, a ratio where you're earning a certain percentage or a certain amount per hour worked. We can also do that based off of selective pay codes too. So if there are certain pay codes that you don't want to be able to accrue time on, we can be selective about how we want to do that as well. In addition to the accrual side of it, we also have the ability to set up balance rules and balance tables that would allow the organization to limit how much an employee could have in an ongoing capacity as far as an ongoing balance, or in an annual accrual. So if you only want to allow your employee to accrue so many hours per year, that can also be established there. So we do have a lot of flexibility in how we set up these plans. They can be based obviously on seniority. So how long you've been with the organization would determine what level of accrual that you're getting. And we do, like I said, have the ability to create formulas and calculations around those as well. That would allow us to have a lot of flexibility in what and how people accrue in each of these plans.
So is it typical that when you're running these accrual calculations, is it more typical to do it at the conclusion of a pay period, or do you see organizations do something like maybe daily, or what's best practice on the GHR side, or what have you seen?
Yeah, on the GHR side, we're actually accruing these accruing these absence plans during the payroll process, right? So especially if you've got accrual plans that are built off of hours worked, then it's pretty much a necessity that it correspond with your payroll cycle processing. If you're doing a flat rate that you're accruing no matter what, right? So it doesn't matter if you work 1 hour or 80 hours within a pay cycle, then you can run those essentially outside of a pay a payroll cycle. But generally speaking, balances are only updated once we close the absence cycle. So in addition to the payroll cycle, we have an absence cycle that would, again, correspond with each other. And you can run those absence cycles independently. You can run additional absence cycles if you need to. But for the most part, any balance updates only happen once you close whatever absence cycle that you're on. I guess in theory, you could run it daily if you brought in time records daily, especially if you had something like that. But in general, what we see most customers do is run this absence cycle through along with their payroll cycle processing. And then occasionally, or maybe like in an off cycle week where like a manual adjustment and those types of items would be a special cycle that would get run through. And that's pretty standard too for most customers to see that additional cycle, in an off week where maybe, like I said, adjustments or other things need to be made to the employee information.
Cool. Yeah, from a WFM perspective, I think the frequency of the accruals, very flexible, daily, weekly, biweekly, monthly. Sounds like there's a lot of crossover there on when the actual accrual happens or when the employee becomes eligible for that accrual. From a WFM perspective, I guess the unique thing here is that WFM has the ability to do real-time calculations. So what I mean by that is anytime a clock is submitted or a timesheet is saved, it goes through the rule engine that actually processes the accruals real time. So in reality, every time you're recalculating a timesheet, it's processing what those balances would be. And you'd have to go to a future timesheet to see the accrual happen for hours worked in a previous pay period, but they would be there. They just wouldn't be available until the date they're supposed to be eligible for them for. So that is a real benefit of WFM, I think, is that real-time calculation. And basically, that's almost every time you submit a timesheet. So a lot of the same type of capabilities exist in WFM in terms of how the system is processing those specific amounts of the accruals. The calculation engine in WFM also has a lot of flexibility based on seniority, similar to GHR, accruals based on actual hours worked, which is what you had just mentioned there, and why you do that at payroll close. Proration based on FTE, so maybe you get 8 hours every pay period if you're full-time, but if you're 0.75 FTE, you might just get 6. New hire proration, so if you get hired mid-year and you have an annual accrual, WFM has the ability to do that sort of calculated new hire proration. It can also calculate what your seniority will be at the end of the year if you have unique requirements that determine how much your accruals are based on end of year seniority. So a lot of the standard stuff that might exist out there in the industry, WFM can support. One call out here is in the Infor WFM module, it does have the Groovy extensibility framework. And that's really, really useful for things like complex pay rules, complex conditions within pay rules, but it also has the ability to extend our accrual engine. So if you have a really unique requirement out there that just makes more sense within a Groovy extension, then the system does allow that even in multi-tenant for those more complex calculations. That's really, really neat. I'd say the big highlight of the WFM accrual calculation engine is that real-time processing and that ability to calculate those future balances. And that could be in the next pay period. It also could be 6 months from now, and it just helps employees figure out what their balances might be when they want to take their vacation in 6 months. A lot of crossover there, I think, as well, in terms of how the two systems calculate the actual accrual that you're awarded at the end of, or at the frequency that is determined by the organization.
So just as a question about the future dated or the future potential accruals, I'm assuming that would take into account both like an hours base, like if we were accruing based off of the hours worked, it would just estimate maybe your hours? Or how does that work with this in a scenario where I'm accruing a certain amount per hour worked in the
Yeah, I'd say
future?
a pretty common one out there is like sick leave, where you might be earning 1 hour of sick leave for every 30 hours that you work. But some other common examples out there would be maybe you get 8 hours per pay period, but that amount is actually reduced if you have any quote unquote bad codes on your timesheet. That might be you called out for an 8-hour shift. So your 8 hours might be prorated based on that bad time code, right? Does that make sense? You
Okay,
have
yeah.
kind of two ways of looking at it: the actual accrual based on the actual hours worked, right? But you also might have a flat amount accrual that gets reduced based on how many hours you worked in one of those bad codes, or didn't work, I guess is the more common example, like if you called out sick or just no call, no show or something like that. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, I think so. It prorates it based off of that, of those rules, when if you have, as you said, a bad pay code in there, or maybe an unworked or pay code in mixed in with your regular pay. Okay, very nice.
Yeah, good question. So I guess we'll move on to actually the fun stuff, actually requesting time off and taking time
That's
off.
right.
So I'll start with you and GHR.
Yeah. So employees do have the ability. We actually, I should say, we have the ability to configure it so that employees can come in and request time off directly through their employee space. So it would link directly and show their current balances. So one of, I guess, maybe a limitation that we have in GHR is that we can show the current balance and any approved or pending approved time out there, but we don't have the ability to show projected accruals, if that makes sense. So we won't be able to see that there, but the employees would be able to come in and see their current balance if they have pending or approved time off requests out there already, and see kind of what available balance they have to request time off. Managers then do have the ability to approve that time off or reject that time off. Infor does deliver flows that would allow that. Managers can do that in their employee space, in their manager space view. And the manager can come in and see all of their employees, their staff, and they can view it in a chart form so that they can see if they have multiple employees off on the same day as what's being requested and so on. So they have the ability to view that in a chart. And then they also have the ability to view their staff accrual balances, as well as, if somebody's maybe approaching a high limit, or, maybe approaching no hours left in their buckets. They do have the ability to look at that and view that from manager space in GHR.
Yeah, you bring up a good point about employee and manager spaces. I know that Infor, in one of their most recent CUs, introduced a hybrid employee and manager space. So if you're an organization that leverages both GHR and WFM, you can actually tailor that towards your organization, and the links for time off can point to whatever module that your time off planning lives in. So that's really, really useful. So that was a good call out on the employee and manager space.
Yeah, and the workspaces, I think, as we see more integrated customers that have both WFM and GHR, I think those are going to be more important to have as a part of our, implementation process, right? So that we have the ability to make that seamless for the end user, both for employees and managers, right? No matter which piece of software that they're using, which part of the software that they're using. So.
Right, because an employee just sees, most of the time, they see Infor Cloud Suite as just one system. They don't really have a concept of there being different modules. That's super important, at least from an end user perspective.
Exactly.
So from time off planning within WFM, so this is probably one of the shining points, I'd say, of WFM, is that employees can leverage the application for, in the self-service portal, which is accessed via Infor Go, which is a mobile app on Android and iOS. They could have, in their palm of their hands, they can have their time off planner. And that time off planner is very robust in the sense that it does provide that real-time visibility to their balances. So they can go out to that 6-month date that I talked about previously, click on a specific day, click on a specific balance type, and see exactly what their balance is projected to be on that specific date. And that's a win-win, I think, for the employee experience, because it helps employees and helps users make better decisions when requesting time off. So that's a big benefit in our ability to calculate those future balances. Within the time off planner, the time off requests themselves follow a standard workflow that GHR is probably is very similar to GHR capabilities. The time off requests themselves have optional or required fields in there for reason codes, which would be predefined reasons that exist in a dropdown. Of course, they have the ability to do free-form comments, and then there are encrypted attachments. You might need a doctor's note or jury duty summons that you want to attach to a time off request for proof to aid in the approval process. So it does have those optional capabilities as well. So pretty standard approval workflow, but they can be kind of tailored towards an organization requirements. Some organizations have more approval, needs, multi-tiered approvals. So you have a first level approval, then a second level approval. Maybe it's just for certain time off types. We have the ability to do auto approval for certain types of groups. So maybe you allow exempt employees to submit time off that gets automatically approved. We have the ability to escalate time off requests that have not been approved in a certain amount of time. Of course, we have role-based notifications and approval controls. So if you have certain time off requests that are approved by an employee's direct manager, they can go directly to the manager. And then if they have more specialized time off requests, such as jury duty that needs to go to payroll, you can route that time off request to like a payroll department. So a lot of flexibility there in terms of notifications and that approval control. If you're using WFM for more than just time and attendance, so if you're using WFM for one of our advanced scheduling modules like MVS or multi-view scheduler, or LFSO, labor forecasting and schedule optimization, the time off planner does seamlessly integrate with timesheets and those scheduling modules. So it'll automatically take them off the schedule and move that shift if they were scheduled to an unscheduled or unfilled status, alerting managers that they need to find coverage for that. So that's really, really useful. And then the MBS and LFSO scheduling modules also talk back to the timesheets and the time off planner. So you could manually book somebody off that may be called in sick, and that sick call would automatically relay back over to the time off planner and the timesheets. That's really neat that they can communicate back and forth as it relates to time off. And really overall, the time off approval, so when it gets to actually the approval state, it is pretty robust and advanced to allow managers to make educated decisions when they're making time off approvals. So you can do things by sorting requests based on first come, first serve. So if you only allow 3 employees out on a given day, you can sort the time off request based on who requested first. You can sort it by seniority dates, and maybe you want to give your most seasoned employees preferential choice on vacation weeks. It does have a lot of flexibility in the sense that managers can look at their entire team at once to help them make better decisions as it relates to time off approval itself.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a lot of flexibility in there as far as what you can see, and I really like that idea of it integrating with your scheduler like that too. That's great.
Yeah, I guess to contrast, like if an organization does choose to use both GHR and WFM, but maybe they see an advantage to keeping accruals in GHR, WFM has the ability to import those balances on whatever cadence or schedule that is decided. So if GHR processes those accruals every pay period, WFM can take a feed every pay period to update the balances. What you lose is that kind of the ability to calculate those future dated projected balances. But really, the time off planner and the time off approval screens, those all work the exact same way, whether or not you have your accruals in GHR or in WFM if you're using both modules.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
All right. And now we'll move on to reporting and notifications.
Yeah, so the GHR absence management system does have pretty much all, I would say, like standard reports, right? So we can do have reporting around balances, negative balances, as far as transactions that and accruals, allotments. So we can see all of those things within GHR. We also have the standard functionality that GHR has as far as list view reporting, being able to create custom or configured reports or list views. So a lot of that base functionality that exists in GHR is available to the absence management system. And so we also have the ability to set up alerts based off of a percentage of your balances. So as people approach a zero balance or as people approach a high balance, right, where they would start losing their accruals, we do have the ability to create notifications that can be sent to employees and managers to alert them that they're, reaching either, like I said, the high or the low end of their balances. So those can be scheduled to be sent out periodically so that employees can stay up to date on, where they are. Again, they can look at their balances and things in the employee space, but this is a way that, a special alert to let them know if they're reaching one of those points. I'm assuming WFM probably has some of that same functionality as far as reporting goes as well.
Yeah, pretty standard stuff here on the WFM side as well. We have ad hoc reporting that exists within the WFM modules, so you can quickly run a balance summary report to figure out what your employees' balances would be as of a specific date, right? That we talked about, that ability to calculate future balances, but also the balance detail report, which actually gives you like a line item view of employees' balances. So when they received the accrual, how much the accrual was, when they used a balance, how much they used, if any sort of manual adjustments came in, it would show that, as well as any balance cascades or transfers are set up. So maybe you have a configuration where if you're out of vacation, then your balance automatically cascades to another type of balance. Maybe it's PTO, maybe it's sick. So you can set up cascades, and of course the reporting would show all of that cascading as well. We talked about the employees having that real-time balance visibility via the time off planner and self-service portal. Same thing is true for the managers. They can see all their employees' balances real-time within the time off approval screen, but also those reports that I just talked about. We can set up optional alerts similar to GHR. So if you have certain thresholds that you want to alert a payroll or a manager that somebody's approaching zero, or maybe they're hitting their vacation maximum, and you want to make sure that employees are made aware of hey, if you hit your maximum, you can't accrue anymore. So that might be important for the organization. I'd say increasingly also important is the ability to export balances from WFM for primarily like GL liability purposes. So I know GHR can send that information to FSM. WFM can also set up a balance export to be able to achieve that. But oftentimes those exports are desired to be sent to HR, like I said, finance department, or maybe a third-party system like a check vendor. So if you want balances on your pay stubs, things like that. So a lot of ad hoc reporting capabilities, optional alerts, and then there's just the ability to view your balances all over the application, both from an employee level and a manager level. So
I think you brought up a good point. Yeah, and that I didn't mention too, but we do have the capability, obviously, within the GHR absence management to put those absence balances on the checks that get printed through third party and then we also have the ability to send to finance, right? Those accruals for balance accruals. Yeah, I didn't bring that up earlier, but that's a good point. We do have that capability as well. And those are built in as base functionality within the module itself. So just a few flags to flip on to tell the system to do it, right?
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's all of our formal content. We're hoping that everyone on the call today got a lot of information on both the capabilities of GHR and WFM, some of the differences, some of the advantages of WFM, some of the advantages of GHR. Ultimately, I think it'll come down to your organization's specific requirements. And then I highly encourage you to work directly with your implementation partner and your consultant team and the project team to determine what makes the most sense for your organization. But as you can see, both modules are very flexible, and there's lots of different capabilities within each of the modules, and hopefully you learned a thing or two to help make that decision process a little bit easier for your organization today. So thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.